introduction as the name for inconsistent but non-trivial formal systems. Part of this talk has previously appeared in section 433 of the book, you know the book, written by Evandro Luiz Gomes and Itala D'Ottaviano, in Portuguese, Para Além das Colunas de Hércules, uma história da paraconsistência, Beyond the Columns of Hercules, a history of paraconsistency, from Heraclitus to Newton da Costa, published by the Unicamp University Press and by Coleção Clé, published in 2016. An extended and enhanced English version of the book will be published by Santesi Library book series by Springer. The title will be Illuminating Contradiction, a History of Paraconsistency from Heraclitus of Ephesus to Newton da Costa. But very recently, the paper that is the basis of my presentation was published by the South American Journal of Logic, dated of 2020, but it was very recently published. The title of the book is Baptizing Paraconsistent Logic, the title of the paper, The Unique Touch of Miró Quesada. I will present a small introduction. I will show you the famous correspondence between Da Costa and Quesada, introducing paraconsistent logic and paraconsistency into the word, the etymological roots of the words, and some final remarks. Let's recall that a theory whose underlying language has a symbol for negation is inconsistent if there is a formula of its language such that the formula and its negation are both theorems of the theory. Otherwise, the theory is called consistent. A theory is trivial if all formulas of its language are theorems. Recall that if the underlying logic of a theory is classical logic or another standard logic such as intuitionistic logic, inconsistency entails triviality and conversely. A theory is trivial if all formulas of its language are theorems. If the underlying logic of a theory is classical logic, or another standard logic, such as intuitionistic logic, inconsistency entails triviality and conversely. I had spoken that. A logical system is paraconsistent if it can be the underlying logic for inconsistent but non-trivial theories called paraconsistent theories. Only to recall, in paraconsistent logics, the scope of the principle of non-contradiction is, in a certain sense, restricted. In every paraconsistent logic, from a formula and its negation, it is not possible in general to deduce any formula of the language. That is, in paraconsistent logics, the principle ex falso sequitur quod libet is not valid in general. In paraconsistent logics, the notions of inconsistency and triviality are in fact independent notions. We use in general distinct names for the principle ex falso sequitur quod libet. In Middle Ages, it was very used, the expression ex impossibile sequitur quod libet. Also, it's usual in the literature, ex contradictione sequitur quod libet, and nowadays it's usual to use it as the principle of explosion. But the study of inconsistent but non-trivial theories and of the deductive systems underlying such theories was practiced for some time from the 60s into the 70s without a suitable name being attributed to it. Until an appropriate name was finally proposed, theorists involved in the investigation of the systems simply referred to them as logics of inconsistent formal systems. The birth certificate of paraconsistent logic was drawn up in a letter from the Peruvian philosopher Francisco Miró Quesada Cantuarias, who died with 101 years in 2019, the proposer of the name, to Newton da Costa, one of the creators of modern paraconsistent logic. In the abundant correspondence between them, the letter dated September 29, 1975 is especially remarkable. This correspondence is in the historical archives of the Center for Logic, Epistemology, and History of Science of University of Campinas. In this notable letter, Miró Quesada begins by expressing great contentment over Da Costa's having invited him to come the following year to the University of Campinas, Unicamp, to my university in Campinas, Brazil, to participate in the third Latin American Symposium on Mathematical Logic, known as the Third Islam. Miró Quesada was even, according to the letter, more satisfied to be able to respond to his friend's request that he find a name for the logics of inconsistent and non-trivial formal systems. As noted earlier, a suitable name for the theory of inconsistent and non-trivial formal systems was needed in order to clearly express the theoretical position of its advocates and thereby favor its understanding and acceptance within the logical, mathematical, philosophical community. Newton da Costa, in the volume La Filosofia de la Lógica de Francisco Miró Quesada Cantuarias, in a book, Lógica, Razón y Humanismo, la obra filosófica de Miró Quesada, Logic, Reason, and Humanism, the philosophical work by Francisco Miró Quesada, edited in 1992, Newton da Costa, in a paper, relates how this came about. It was then that I wrote to Miró Quesada, who viewed the new logic with great enthusiasm, asking him to suggest a name for it. I remember, as if it were today, that he responded by making 3 proposals. It could be called meta-consistent, ultra-consistent, or paraconsistent. After commenting on these possible names, he stated that he found the latter to be the best. For me, the word paraconsistent sounded splendid, and I began to use it, insisting also that all interested parties do the same. In his mentioned letter to Da Costa, Miró Quesada argued in sequence for his 3 suggestions. In presenting the first of them, Miró Quesada says, I am very pleased to hear from you about the name that could be given to the logic of inconsistent systems. It is a problem that would be easy if it were not for the pernicious semantic load of the words. I think the ideal name is ultra-consistent logics, because ultra in Latin means beyond. Remember the pillars of Hercules, non plus ultra, and the motto of the colonizers, plus ultra, that is beyond the columns of Hercules. This mention in the letter, saying the pillars of Hercules, you see after that, Quesada mentions that he considers that Newton da Costa had surpassed the pillars of Hercules, was motivated the title of our book in Portuguese, Beyond the Columns of Hercules, and our book about the history of paraconsistency in the Western thought. And the colonizers, there was a movement in Peru. I didn't know that, but I tried to understand, and I asked it to my Peruvian logician colleagues. There was a movement called Colónidas in Peru, where they were discussing the colonization, the Spanish colonization, and certain problems they used to have, and they have until now in the Spanish colonies in Latin America. And it was a special movement called Colónidas in Peru. And Miró Quesada goes on his suggestion. You are a colonizer of logic because you have exceeded consistency. You have created a logic that goes beyond consistency. Miró Quesada wrote to Newton da Costa, as it can be applied to both consistent and inconsistent systems, avoiding trivialization in the last case. The bad thing is that ultra is used today as synonymous with an extremely intense increase of equality. So ultra-consistent logic gives the impression of being a logic that has an extraordinary consistency and anointed and consecrated consistency. This is the letter from Miró Quesada to Newton da Costa, sent in 1975. We have published the study in our book, and we have the original letter at the Center for Logic, Unicamp. The metaphor evoked by Miró Quesada is admirable. Newton da Costa, says Miró Quesada, has gone beyond the Herculean pillars of logic. Logicae Hercules columnae. That is, beyond consistency, extending the limits of non-logicity and reestablishing them through paraconsistent logic. The image evoked here by Miró Quesada comes from Greek mythology. Hercules, in carrying out his 10th labor, bringing the oxen of the monster Geryon to King Eurystheus, traveled to the island of Erythea in the far west of the Mediterranean. As a memorial to his passage, according to some versions of the myth, Hercules erected 2 mountains, one in Africa and the other in Europe. The first being Mount Hacho in Ceuta, or alternatively Mount Musa in Morocco, the second being the rock of Gibraltar. In another version of the myth, the Greek hero split a mountain in the middle, giving birth to the Strait of Gibraltar, and then connecting the Mediterranean to the Atlantic Ocean. The pillars of Hercules columnae, were considered for centuries by the maritime peoples of the Mediterranean world to be the limits of navigation. Like the navigators of the age of exploration, Newton da Costa has traversed the columns of Hercules, the former traveling to a new land, the latter toward new perspectives of logic. For this reason, writes Miró Quesada, perhaps it would be better to say, instead of ultra-consistent or ultra-consistent, perhaps it would be better to say meta-consistent logics, because meta means beyond or after in Greek. That is more or less the same thing as ultra. It also means other things with different grammatical cases. It also sounds very nice. It is true that it is a barbarism, or rather a solecism, but this doesn't matter because sociology is also. The defect of meta-consistent is that meta is associated in the mathematical philosophical milieu with meta-theory and gives the impression that it is a logic related to meta-language. But aside from this semantic trait, I would not see any objection. Like the previous suggestion, this term suffers semantic interference from more consolidated uses of the prefix. Miró Quesada then suggests the name that would be destined to travel the world and accurately translate the very spirit of the logics of inconsistent and non-trivial formal systems. Miró Quesada writes, there is, however, another possibility, use para, which in Greek means next to. Paraconsistent logics sounds nice. A little esoteric, gives a more or less precise idea of what it is about. Logics that are not like the classical ones, but that fall next to them as they can be applied to inconsistent systems, and has the advantage that there is no deforming semantic load. I therefore propose that you choose from the three following names, whose precision is due to their negative semantic load: ultra-consistent logics, meta-consistent logics, or paraconsistent logics. I hope that you like any of the three, and I would be happy to have contributed to baptizing these types of logics that have such great philosophical importance. This is undoubtedly the first time in history that the term paraconsistent was written. Miró Quesada's letter is therefore a primary source unique to the history of paraconsistency and may be said to constitute the baptismal certificate of paraconsistent logic. The choice of the name contributed greatly to the effort to establish and legitimize the area of logical formal research. We have here a copy of the letter sent from Miró Quesada to Newton da Costa. The original is in our historical archives at the Center for Logic, and the name was finally made public. This letter is from 1975, and the name was made public at an important continental logic event, the third Latin American Symposium on Mathematical Logic, the third Islam. Such continental event was held at the Institute of Mathematics, Statistics, and Computer Science at the University of Campinas. It was held during the period July 11 to 17 in 1976. The Center for Logic, Epistemology, and the History of Science had not been created. It was being projected in 1976, and the Center for Logic was officially created in 1977. And this was the first Latin American symposium held at Unicamp. At the third Latin American Symposium on Mathematical Logic, organized by Aida Inês Arruda, and the first of these symposiums to be held at Unicamp, Miró Quesada was an invited speaker, and he lectured I was a student, and he presented a very beautiful talk on heterodox logics and the problem of the unity of logic. He presented his talk on July 15, 1976. Miró Quesada was a very important researcher, philosopher, and logician in Peru. He had been the Minister of Culture of Peru, and he was one of the founders of one of the most important journals, periodicals in Lima, Peru. And he wrote until almost his death. Every week, every month, he used it to write a very beautiful article and a periodical. It was in this lecture, in our paper, published in the South American Journal of Logic. We have discussed a little this paper because Quesada has presented a very interesting analysis concerning heterodox logics, and he has suggested a very interesting classification of the recent created non-classical logics. It was in his lecture during the lecture, I was there, I remember, that he made public the suggestion of the names paraconsistent logic and paraconsistency. Here is a photo of the opening session of the Islam. Aida Huda, the organizer, she was one of my teachers. Rolando Schwacke, the Chilean logician. Biratan D'Ambrosio, who was the director of the Institute of Mathematics. Joseph Schoenfeld, who was the president of the Association for Symbolic Logic. Newton da Costa, and Miró Quesada, Pablo Miró Quesada. During the event itself, Elias Humberto Alves and Carlos Lungazo, Roberto Lungazo, had already, during the evening, in their communications, they used the term paraconsistent in their communications, called on paraconsistent logic and a paraconsistent infinitary propositional calculus, respectively. The proceedings of the third Islam, titled Non-Classical Logics, Model, Theory, and Computability, were published in 1977 by North Holland, edited by Aida Huda, Newton da Costa, and Rolando Schwacke. But the lecture delivered by Quesada and the communications presented by Alves and Lungazo are not in the book, for they were not sent by the authors for publication. Here is a photo of the book. Very important logicians participated in the event. Here is Miró Quesada, Aida Huda, Rolando Schwacke, Schoenfeld, Newton da Costa, Charles Pinker, Roberto Signoli, and several others. Da Costa describes a phenomenon unique in the history of logic in that volume mentioned that I have just mentioned, published in 1992 in honor of Miró Quesada. Da Costa writes, 2 or 3 months later, the miracle took place. The term circled the world, and all centers directly or indirectly linked to logic in the northern and southern hemispheres began to use it. I think that very few times in the history of science, and certainly in the history of logic, has anything similar happened, because not only did the word travel the whole world, but the logic itself that Miró Quesada called paraconsistent gained a formidable impulse. It became one of the most debated logical theories of all time. Quesada's suggestion of employing the preposition para takes from Attic Greek. I am speaking about the Hellenic roots of the word, of the Attic Greek was absolutely successful. In ancient Greek, the preposition para takes in a broad semantic spectrum, even admitting opposite denotations among its meanings. Ancient Greek, explains Muracho in his Lingua Greca, Greek language, published in 2003. Ancient Greek makes use of invariable words, initially 18 prepositions which, before verbs, add to the verbal meaning, action or state, a spatial relationship, and by metaphor, a temporal relation. In this sense, para means next to, in complete opposition to the idea of within. The original concrete meaning of para, Muracho explains, is next to or along with, as Quesada pointed out above, and its meaning varies in accord with the grammatical case of its object. When the object is in the dative case, para means can have the meaning of at the side of, as in the following example, those who are aside the king. In Xenophon, quoted by Muracho. But when the object is in the accusative case, para can have the meaning of beyond, as in the following example, even beyond his power, from Thucydides, quoted by Muracho, Greek language. So, there are the etymological roots that allow the term paraconsistence to encompass distinct philosophical visions of paraconsistency, from the most sober to the most exaggerated. Some scholars, such as Florencio Asenjo, considered the name agreeable, while others suggested alternative names, such as posteriorly. Christian Rutley suggested dialectic logic. Priest also has suggested the name transconsistent logic, and Perjanovsky, the Polish logician, suggested the name para inconsistent logic. These suggestions, however, did not go anywhere, probably due to the great semantic capacity of the term paraconsistent. The term very well translates the logical character of inconsistent, contradictory, but non-trivial logics, while at the same time it's capable of harboring diverse philosophical visions of the ontological study of contradiction. Several important and recognized logicians from various countries participated as invited speakers in the third Latin American Symposium on Mathematical Logic in 1976. From Latin America and Brazil, alongside Ida Ruda, Milton da Costa, Roberto Schwacke, and Roberto Signoli, Rolando Schwacke, Chilean, Roberto Signoli, Argentinian, among others. They were well-known logicians at that time. They also participated in the event young logicians who are nowadays well-known points of reference in Latin American logic. I, Itala D'Ottaviano, I was a doctoral student. I witnessed the atmosphere of effusive revelry and acceptance that accompanied Quesada's lecture and suggestion of the term paraconsistent logic. But in 1989, I also participated in the first World Congress on Paraconsistence. I don't remember if Vazilkov was there, held in Ghent, Belgium, when Jerzy Perjanovsky proposed the alternative name para inconsistent logic for the paraconsistent systems. I also participated in the Jaśkowski Memorial Symposium held in Torun, Poland in 1998, when Perjanovsky once again presented this proposal. In both meetings, I publicly protested and argued against Perjanovsky's suggestion. These suggestions presented by Perjanov appear in his paper, 50 Years of Inconsistent Logic, published in 1999. Although we do not have the letter from Da Costa that Quesada was responding to, Da Costa talked about the event under discussion in a book honoring the 70th year of his Peruvian correspondent, the same paper I have mentioned previously. Da Costa wrote, "Several years ago, when I needed a convenient and meaningful name for a logic that did not, from the start, eliminate contradictions as false, that is, as absolutely unacceptable, Miró Quesada helped me. On this point, it should be remembered that, at that time, all logics truly condemned contradictions. The new logic in which I worked, therefore, still found a great deal of resistance. It was little publicized, and those who were aware of it were, for the most part, skeptical about it. Da Costa's account shows how difficult the early days of paraconsistent logic were. If today paraconsistency is a theoretical option among many alternatives, at the time it was first proposed in its beginnings, it was necessary for the pioneers of paraconsistency to overcome resistance in order for the new perspective on logicity to be legitimately admitted. Both from the theoretical and the paradigmatic points of view, it was necessary for paraconsistent logic to be accepted as valid by the community of those who studied logic. On this point, the name paraconsistent seems to have played a key role. With regard to the choice of the name and to Quesada's suggestion for the term paracomplete, he also was responsible for the suggestion of paracomplete, of the term paracomplete for logics in which the principle of the excluded middle is not valid in general. And to Quesada's suggestion for the term paracomplete for describing those logics as dual as the paraconsistent ones, in which the principle of the excluded third does not hold, Da Costa states, "It does not seem to me an exaggeration to say that in these two episodes, the name created the thing named. Is this not a miracle? Or, if someone prefers an act of magic, as the answer has to be positive, the appellation of magician should be applied to Miró Quesada." Today, Newton da Costa looks back on these events and recognized once again their importance. I will mention part of the interview Newton da Costa gave us, and that has been published in our Portuguese book, and that will appear in the English book. Newton said, "I think the name is fundamental. When Professor Miró Quesada, a great friend of mine, a Peruvian, suggested his name, in a matter of months, the whole world was talking about paraconsistent logic. In this case, the name almost created the discipline. In fact, he was a full professor at the Faculty of Law there at the University of San Marcos. And perhaps the first book on juridical logic in Latin America was written by him. Francisco Miró Quesada suggested 3 names to Newton da Costa, but he suggested to Newton da Costa an all-embracing name for inconsistent but non-trivial formal systems. And in spite of other proposals, the term paraconsistent prevailed. Miró Quesada, in presenting his master's search to the international academic community during the third Latin American Symposium on Mathematical Logic, inevitably left his mark on the history of paraconsistency and paraconsistent logic. In a tribute, here we have Newton da Costa, nowadays was 93 years old, and Pablo Miró Quesada, a little time before he passed away. Спасибо. Thank you.
Once more, thank you for your talk. And now the questions. We have somebody a question concerning these problems.
I just wanted to present this because this is a very recent paper, and it's very nice to know the story. I thought that you would like to know.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah, it's my question, Elena. Thank you very much, Itala, for your interesting story about the origin of this term. As we know, the grandfather, Russian grandfather of paraconsistent logic, Nikolai Vasilyev, gave the names of imaginary or non-Aristotelian logic for his proto-paraconsistent logic. Do you consider this name as useful or misleading for paraconsistent logic?
I like very much the imaginary logic. I like Vasilev's papers, and we have studied his papers and Vasilev's proposal for his non-classical logics. At the beginning, he was thinking about logics in which the third excluded middle would not be valid. And after that, he assumed that the principle of non-contradiction would not be valid. But I think that the name paraconsistent logic, I think that it's more adequate for the meaning in the intuitive perception of inconsistent and non-trivial systems. I think that in imaginary logic is more general, don't you think? Mm-hmm. It's not so specific. I think that it's more universal.
Yeah, thank you.
I like it very much.
Yeah, thank you.
In continuation of this question, I had from Polish logicians that many Polish logicians evaluate Vasilyev's system like not the paraconsistent logic, but as a case of paraconsistent syllogistic. They do not use the term paraconsistent, simply imaginary syllogistic. Do you think that such a soft formulation is valid in this case?
I didn't understand quite well. You are speaking about paraconsistent logistics. I like it.
Syllogistics, I mean, that's the first system of paraconsistent logic was the first system of Polish logicians, and not Vasilyev. I mean, this.
I'm not understanding quite well. If I think that we could call Vasilyev logic as paraconsistent.
Yes, he didn't use the name paraconsistent. And my question is concerning modern treatment of this situation, because clearly we said that Vasilyev's system was paraconsistent, system of paraconsistent logics.
Yes, I think that Vasilyev for me is the forerunner of consistent logic. He didn't build, he didn't presented axiomatically, but the fundamental ideas of paraconsistency are in Vasilyev's papers. I think that more in Vasilyev's papers than in Lukashevic's papers. The general idea of non-classical logic, of universal logic.
I know that the translations from Vasilyev's papers were well known to Newton da Costa, and so you gave me such a text from Portugal, Vasilyev's work. But does Newton da Costa evaluate this Vasilyev's paper as paraconsistent logic?
Yes.
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 He's good. He's good because.
Recall that before that you have translated Vasilyev's paper, Yusupov, to English, Aida Huda, the first disco and collaborator of Da Costa, studied Vasilyev's papers, and we have published a book in Portuguese with the translation into Portuguese of the three important logic papers by Vasilyev. We have studied it in Brazil. And recall that church in the well-known and celebrated bibliography on logic in the I think that in the 1980s he presented Vasilyev's logic as many valued logics. It was Aida Huda who called attention that Vasilyev was paraconsistent.
Okay, thank you.
Aida died in 1984, and his last paper was on Vasilyev's papers, three articles, and she claimed that the papers that Vasilyev was paraconsistent.
Okay, thank you very much. One more questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I recall that an announcement before finishing?
Yes, please.
We will have in Campinas next February, from February 6th to 17th, a very important event. The São Paulo School of Advanced Science in Contemporary Logic, Information, and Rationality. We will have, during 14 days, 8 courses and 9 plenary talks. Elena Dragalina is one of special invited speakers. She will present a very important aula magna, an invited talk. And we will support the participation of 100 students, travel expenses, health insurance, and stay during 2 weeks in Brazil. According to our call of participation, the period for inscriptions would be ended yesterday. We have many inscriptions from all around the world, but we have received yesterday several requests, and we have just decided to extend the period for more days. I was putting the announcement on the site, but we are putting it in several groups. And so we have received the inscription of some Russian students. But I would like to tell that there is somebody who would like to send us the inscription. We have some more days. Okay.
Itala, thank you very much for it's a great news, and thank you for the invitation and the presentation. Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to see you in Brazil. Yeah, it should be a great advantage. Okay, thank you.
Nice to have you. And thank you for the invitation to participate in this meeting. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is the end. So,
Thank you. Bye-bye. For you, from Brazil to Russia.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Вырубайте.